without further ado, I'm gonna let Juanita from Clean Water Action take over and talk to you guys a little bit about lead safety and how it can affect all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica.
Yep.
Again, my name is Quinita Kendrick. I work for Clean Water Action, Clean Water Fund. I do our environmental justice organizing and I manage our lead hazard awareness program. Today, I'm here to share some information about what is lead and why we should care about it. The program that I manage overall, the Lead Hazard Awareness Program, the purpose of it is to educate Philadelphians, no matter what neighborhood you're from, on how to identify and live safely with community sources of lead. So during this presentation, we'll be talking about different community sources of lead. So for the presentation, as I told Jessica, I'm gonna take my video off. Um, I do want to say, I want to ask that we leave questions for the end. A brief announcement that I want to make to those of you watching is that I'm actually currently planning a Living Safely with Lead web series. And it takes this presentation to the next step, right? So during this time, it's about 20 minutes, it's very brief educational. However, during the web series, we'll have 5 different segments from with local experts who will be giving their own presentation. So there'll be a segment on lead and health that'll be done by Dr. Horwath from University of Pennsylvania Center for Excellence in Environmental Toxicology. There'll be lead and soil and dust, also with someone from University of Pennsylvania. There'll be tenants' rights in Philadelphia's new lead abatement law. You can learn about your rights as a tenant and like what that means for your housing and things of that sort. There's going to be a lead and drinking water segment. And then lastly, there'll be a lead and paint renovation and repair. Excuse me, let me backtrack. The lead and drinking water will be featuring Sateria Kersey from Philadelphia Water Department, and the tenants' rights segment will be featuring 2 attorneys from Community Legal Services. Lastly, the lead in renovation, repair, and paint will be featuring speakers from ECA. And they'll be talking about home renovations and how to stay safe and things of that sort. So if there's anything that I can't particularly answer at the end of the session, just know that you'll have another opportunity to learn a little bit more. So if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen, Jessica, and I'll get started. Great. And I won't be able to see y'all during the presentation when I'm in that full mode. So if there are any technical things happening, if you could just either Jessica or Anthony just audibly say something. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. Okay, let me turn off my. And can you all hear me just fine?
Yep, sounds good.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I can't see you, so I'm going to be waiting for the audible until the Q&A session. Okay, so the presentation, I'll begin. So living safely with lead, and this is a part of our lead hazard awareness program at Clean Water Action. So just an overview of what I'll be talking to you all about today. We're going to be covering what is lead in the first place, why we should be concerned about it, different community sources of lead, different health effects of lead, how it impacts, for example, how it impacts like children versus adults. And then there's going to be a segment where I do address children specifically. And then we're going to end off with how to live more safely with lead and how to maintain a lead safe home. So first, what is lead? So the image on the right hand side is an image of the periodic table. I don't know if many of you remember this from school, but when we're in our chemistry classes, we may have learned about lead at that time. I'm not holding y'all to remember everything, but that's that image for those of you who need a reminder. Lead is indicated in the red by Pb. It's a naturally occurring chemical that is found in the Earth's crust. But although it's naturally occurring, it is important to note that it is toxic, it is a heavy metal. And it's toxic to humans. More specifically, it's a neurotoxin, which means that it affects our nervous system, it affects our brains and neurological development, our brain development. Over the course of history, lead has been used for various things. It's been used in metalwork, as the boiling point for lead is super low. So, and what I mean by that is, in order to manipulate lead, it doesn't take a lot of heat. You can actually manipulate lead very simply over a campfire. Whereas with other metals, you might have to use like high pressure or high heat in order to manipulate it and turn it to things that you can use as a consumer. It was also used in paint, which it was banned from paint in 1978, but it was used in paint because it made colors pop, and it lasted a long time. It was also in our gasoline. It's no longer in our gasoline. For those of you who, when you go to the gas station, you see unleaded, that's an indication that there's no lead in that gasoline, because at a time it was in gasoline, and it was banned from it in 1970. So it was in gas, it was in paint, it was in, when the Roman Empire was around, they would actually use it as a sweetener for wines and things, because it's naturally sweet. I think I can say that to y'all as adults, like you can't, I'm not worried about you all like taking the chip and putting it to your mouth, but it does have a natural sweetness to it. So there were all of these like uses for lead, and it's been around and people have been using it for thousands of years. But why do we worry? Okay, so a question that I usually ask when I'm in person to an audience, but because I cannot see y'all engage y'all's perceptions, I would ask, what's a safe level of lead in the body? If anyone, actually, Jessica, do you want to take a stab at that? What do you think a safe level of lead is in the body?
Maybe no lead in the body.
You are correct. That is a trick question. Yeah, there's no safe level of lead in the body. So although it can be like counted and like there's a certain like, if you go to the doctor, they're like, oh, at this amount you get there's no safe lead. There's no safe level, excuse me. And what makes lead pretty like interesting and very sneaky is that it's invisible. It's not something that you can see. When you look at a piece of paint, you can't see the lead on the paint, and something else is that the effects from lead are delayed unless you have had copious amounts of lead exposure, whether that be at your job because you work at a lead smelter maybe, or if you're a child who has like maybe just eaten copious amounts of lead paint at a given time, you won't see a lot of those effects of lead until later on. So that makes it a very interesting thing to observe and study. So a way that I like to think about lead when trying to educate people about it and why it's important and why things of that sort, it's kind of like calories, right? Like you eat calories, you might not see it right away, but maybe if you keep on keeping on, you might see it in a couple months or a couple weeks. So that's just an example of that. So sources of lead. It's important to know that there is no one source of lead. A lot of times when we think of lead, people might talk about lead in drinking water, right, from our pipes. People might talk about lead in paint, right, from Philadelphia's old housing stock, from our houses being so very old. But it can be found in various places. So this first picture is a picture of peeling paint. It's a narrative that we hear a lot. The second picture is a picture of varnish. So on your tub, this is peeling varnish where lead is also may also be present. It can be found in pipes in our aging infrastructure. So I say aging infrastructure because a very long time ago, pipes used to be made containing lead. This is a picture of factories, right? Philadelphia has an industrial past. In Philadelphia alone, there were 36 lead smelters. That's more lead smelters than any other city in America. And specifically in the river wards, so we're talking Kensington, Port Richmond, you know, Fishtown, all of those like nice little neighborhoods that, you know, are along the river. There were 18 of those 36 lead smelters were located there. And then lastly, another source of lead poisoning is consumer products, right? So like consumer products that have been painted with paint that may contain lead. So as you can see, there's like a little old toy here, and its paint is kind of going away. Because that's a lot of different like sources of lead to remember, at Clean Water Action, we came up with this like little rhyme. We say shy dinosaurs party while intoxicated. And each first letter stands for a source of lead. Shy stands for, the S in shy stands for soil. The D in dinosaur stands for dust. The P stands for peeling paint and varnish. The W stands for water pipes. And then the I stands for imported consumer goods. So that toy that I showed you in the last slide, in the US, we have banned lead from our paint, but that's not necessarily the case in other countries. So when we have like imported toys, those toys may contain lead in the paint that coats them. Okay, cool. So the impacts of lead. So I'm going to start off by talking about adults. So in adults, lead poisoning can affect various parts of our body. It can manifest as high blood pressure. Sometimes it might be irritability or lack of concentration. In women specifically, women of childbearing age, lead can be passed through through the placenta to the fetus. And could potentially at higher concentrations lead to spontaneous miscarriage. In men, it can lower the sperm count, and it also can or induce sperm abnormalities. So it definitely affects everyone in different ways. And here in the diagram, you'll see other systems that we have, how it affects our kidneys, our digestive systems, our reproductive systems. Next, I want to talk about how it affects kids. Here, it's kind of set up the same way. We can see how it affects the brain, the body, the blood, the kidneys. In kids, it looks like behavior issues sometimes, a lower IQ, or even learning disabilities. Kids are really an important age range to look at when thinking about lead poisoning, because as I said in the beginning of the presentation, it's a neurotoxin, and kids' bodies are constantly developing. Our brains are sharpening, and certain mental faculties are taking place, and lead disrupts that. To get a little bit into the weeds, but not too much into the weeds, for people who like science a little bit, lead actually in the body it mimics calcium, right? So it doesn't do anything for the body, but it goes to all of the places that calcium would go. So it's stored in the bones. And just for those of us who don't know, calcium is something that can be found in leafy greens or in milks, just for those of us who need that reminder. So yeah, it goes to those places and it replaces calcium, and it does that in the brain too. Calcium is also important for our neurological development, which is why we can see how, as in this picture, it's having all of these neurological effects on the child. I'll talk a little bit more about children in this next slide. So why are some other reasons why kids are more susceptible to lead poisoning, outside of their growing bodies, is that they have an increased exposure risk, which means that they are more likely to have and consume lead in some way, right? So for example, toddlers or babies who are crawling on the ground where that lead dust from the peeling lead paint may be, getting it on their fingers as they're crawling, putting it in their mouth, or maybe they're at the window sill, right, where there's the lead paint on that, the window trough, and their fingers are there. Or even here, this point about tasty paint chips, It's sweet. It's a naturally sweet thing. So it's not, kids, there's something called pico, and like kids put things that aren't food in their mouth, and this is one of them. I talked about this brain development. So I'm now going to get into identifying the lead hazards. So I talked about paint a lot. It's in paint. That's not just our windows or our walls. That's also the railings outside of our house or the porches outside of our house that may be painted. And the way in which, just to get, I want to give this to you up front, as opposed to like presenting it later, the way that you can check for lead in paint is through this, it's called a lead check swab. And this can be purchased from any like home improvement store. And for those of us getting our products from offline, you could go, not to like advance Amazon's career, but Amazon or like any other place. And basically how it works, as you can see, there's like a stick, and inside, excuse me, inside of the stick, there's a serum. And when you hold it in your hand, you crush you squeeze on the stick, which crushes the serum inside, you shake it, and then you gently squeeze and rub, maybe I wanna rub a piece of the wall that I'm interested in seeing if it has lead. If it turns red, like you can see on one of the sticks, there's lead present. And you can also send it to, there are instructions, you can send them into the lab, have it tested, all of these things. But I just wanted to say that this is one way that you can do that yourself. I'm gonna move on. So if you were to do that test, it is important that when you go to, then, okay, I have lead, now what? There's a whole process of like lead removal and what that looks like. You can, in order to do that, you can definitely use professional renovators or certified lead practitioners who do just that, like remove lead. In the web series that I mentioned to you all at the beginning of the presentation, there's going to be a segment specifically on lead in renovation, paint, and repair. So be on the lookout for that. Lead is also in our drinking water. So when we're talking about lead in drinking water, I'm not saying that PWD isn't filtering water and, giving us contaminated water per se. No, the water that leaves PWD is clean. It becomes contaminated when it enters pipes that have lead in them. So that could be pipes like the ones outside of our home, the service line, the water service lines, or that could be our home plumbing. It's also been found in faucets made before before 2014. Some fixtures are something called alloy. They use multiple metals, and sometimes in alloys you'll find lead as well. So something that you can do to ensure that you are living most safely in your home is by flushing your water daily. And so how that works is, so basically, when your water just sits in the pipe for an extended amount of time, like about 8 hours, right? So when you're sleeping, or maybe before the pandemic, when you would go to work or the kids would go to school, while it's sitting, there's the potential that lead is getting into your water from the pipes. A way to kind of like deal with that is by a technique called flushing. And basically that's when you allow for the water to run through your pipes. So you can do that by, you could let your sink, when you're waking up for the day, you can turn on your faucet and let it run for about 5 minutes before you're using it. Or maybe you don't want to turn on your faucet quite yet. Maybe you run the dishwasher, or you take a shower, or things like that. Something that'll just get the water circulating through the pipes in your home. Okay, so next, lead in soil and dust. So as I said, Philadelphia has an industrial past. And what that means is that those factories and all of the pollutants coming out of those factories. Some of those pollutants, one of them was lead, and lead I'm trying to see how I want to say it. Lead is transmitted through the air, and then it can settle in soil. And so when it's in soil, the good thing about it is that it's not mobile. It doesn't just move around. Once it's in the soil, it's there. It stays where it is. But it won't go up and down, which is a good thing for what I'm going to talk about later, which is how you can remediate soil. But anyways, you can have your soil, kind of like you tested soil on the wall, you can have your soil tested for lead as well. That is actually another project that we do in the Lead Hazard Awareness Program is soil testing. We've partnered with University of Pennsylvania to do that. Be on the lookout for soil sampling happening near you. So great. And something else to know about soil and dust is that you can actually track it into your home just via your shoes. When talking about how to live more safely with lead in your home, I will give a tip on how you can reduce tracking in that dirt. Okay, cool. So lead busting techniques. These are some simple things that you can do to continue to make sure you and your family and loved ones are safe. So wash your hands frequently, right? Because lead can stick to our hands. And we might not even know it, right? Touching the railings, maybe we was sweeping and it, having children under the age of 6 tested. Actually, in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, there are some policies coming out about childhood blood lead level testing and when you should get them tested. You should have your child tested at ages 1 and 2. That's when they're doing their crawling. That's when their bodies are growing. This point, maintain a healthy lifestyle. This has to just do with, as I said, lead mimics calcium. And so a good way, and this is kind of being debated at the time in the science world, in the health and science world, is that by making sure that we live these healthy lives and we consume foods with the proper nutrients and nutrients, we can probably reverse actually some of those deficits that come from lead. You want to also avoid letting your child or pets play in bare soil, maybe unless you've had your soil sampled. But I think it's a good practice just to not do it at all. And then lastly, this point is just to be cognizant of where you are purchasing your toys that your kids or loved ones play with. In the United States, in Canada, Europe, in the United Kingdom, they have standards for lead in paint. There's no lead in their paint. However, this may not necessarily be the case for toys that come from China or from certain countries in South America. So this point, it's not saying just buy it from here, but just be cognizant that different countries have different standards. Okay, so keep it out. So this is something that I was talking about when covering lead in soil. So by removing your shoes at the door, it's been shown to reduce carpet lead dust, right? The lead dust that's in the carpet can be found in the carpet by 98.5%, which is a huge percentage. You want to smoke outside always. Now y'all might be like, what does smoking have to do with this? But actually it's been found that lead, when tobacco leaves are growing, they're really, without getting into the science, lead can be found on tobacco leaves. And so if you were looking for another reason to stop smoking, here it is. So be sure that or if you were just looking for a reason to stop smoking in your house, smoke outside. You want to change your clothes and shower before leaving work. I would say that probably most has to do with people who may be working in work conditions that they may be exposed to things like lead a little bit more. Flush kitchen water daily or use a filter. Oops, excuse me, or use a filter. You also want to, so we talked about keeping it out, right? Now we're going to talk about covering it up, and that has to do with your soil, right? So lead doesn't move, it's immobile. So essentially, by covering bare soil with sod or little like patio stones or mulch, you can kind of like, you can address like potential exposure to lead in that way. These are just some other suggestions like heavy landscape cloth, installing raised bed gardens. So for those of you who don't know, instead of putting your plants directly into the soil, you can put them into a bed. Yes, this is a good point as well. Like if you have a swing at your home, making sure that the dirt that the kids might be, or adults might be swinging and brushing up into, if you put a rubber mat there, that could help with kicking up any soil, any dirt. And putting, this is just more generically, putting throw rugs on top of like the most used parts of playrooms, or the carpets that may be a real big source of holding on to some of the dust in one's home. And lastly, covering peeling paint with tape, right? So it can not fall or not like fall to turn to dust. Yeah. So we said, keep it out, cover it up. Next is wet it down. So you want to make sure that you're hosing down any paved surfaces, paved and non-permeable mean the same thing, surfaces on or around your property. So maybe that's the ground right outside, or like maybe it's like your porch if you have a porch that you feel comfortable doing that with. You also want to make sure that you're cleaning your floors and carpet often. So this is a really important point. You don't want to dry sweep, right? Like with a traditional broom that actually like kicks up dust into the air. By using something like a wet broom or a Swiffer, you're actually able to like literally like put the, you can't see my hands, but put the dirt on the ground and cleaning up that way, as opposed to like sweeping it up and it getting into the air. This point, if you see dust clouds from construction or demolition, know that that's illegal and that you should call air management services at this number. I'll give y'all a little moment to write it down, or you can just call 311. Something for you all to know, when it comes to construction, there's something called wet sweeping, and it's a tactic that's used to make sure that dust clouds are being like, aren't forming and are being managed as like construction or demolition is happening. So if you see a dust cloud, that means that something isn't like being done correctly on that site. Okay, so in conclusion, it's important to know that our exposure to lead can be decreased. We can do that by changing up, adding some habits to our daily lives, like removing our shoes at the door, or flushing our faucets, washing our hands often, which we already do because of the pandemic. Woo. And if you work in certain occupational settings where you're really exposed, maybe like in the dirt or like construction or like anything that you feel like, or even if it's just like, no, I just want to change my clothes just to be safe, you can do that as well. Know that there are barriers that we can create between ourselves and potential lead exposure, like soil covers and raised garden beds. And also just being sure that like when you hear this information, you're spreading it to people that you know, because it does impact all of us. While there are policy solutions out there that are addressing things like lead in rental units and like lead in children's blood, we can't wait for the policy to do what it needs to do. We have to take measures now. We have to take steps now, and that's the purpose of programs like this that are educating you all on what lead is and how to live more safely with it until we can finally get rid of it. So that is the end. of my presentation. I tried to stay at a constant, like not talk too fast. I have some time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, I'll answer them. And if I cannot answer them, that's okay, because we have our very special web series coming up.
We do have some questions. Does anybody, first I want to open it up to anybody who wants to go ahead and turn their mic on and ask a question. I want to just open it up for a little bit there. And if not, you can continue to put them in the chat and I will just ask the questions for you. I also have a couple from Facebook. So Facebook is a little bit behind us. So let's go through some of the questions here and then they'll know we're on the questions and I'll get to theirs as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Does anybody want to turn their mic on and ask a question? Okay. So we talked a lot about like how lead can get into your body, but I just wanted to kind of touch back onto that for a second and ask if it can get in, into your body through your skin? Like if you're touching things that are heavily leaded or like digging in the soil, planting, I don't know, touching other things, can it get in through your skin?
No, it cannot get into it doesn't penetrate the skin. It's mostly through ingestion, through your mouth.
But could you breathe it in if it was in these like dust clouds coming from construction or other ways like that?
Yeah, I mean, like if your mouth is open. I mean, it could also get through your nose, but we have things like nasal hairs that kind of help with filtering that, like like the hairs in your nose. But yeah, it can get in via your mouth via inhalation from those dust clouds. Does that make sense? My answer?
Yeah. And I had a question about soil. So if you're planning on planting a garden or planting things and you haven't had a chance to get your soil tested, is there like a safe amount of topsoil that you should plant in, or is it okay to plant things in soil with lead that you're going to eat?
So I would say don't plant edible produce in soil that may contain lead. There are ways for you to get your lead, your soil tested for lead. Like I said, University of Penn does that specifically, as well as I know Villanova University and Penn actually were doing some collaboration. Actually, during our web series, we'll have someone speaking specifically on that. Like I saw the presentation and she talks about the different types of like vegetables and which ones are more prone. I don't know this information specifically myself, but it's usually the ones that like grow lower to the ground tend to like have more lead, all of these things. So I would say I would encourage you to get your soil tested, and I would discourage planting directly into the ground if you are unsure, because it is stored in vegetables. But Jessica, come to our web series. You will learn a lot. I learned a lot. There's also, UPenn has a really cool like ArcGIS, like a mapping tool, where they've tested various soils in different parts of Philly, and they're trying to like add to that collection like continuously. So that could be really cool. I can like connect you with them if you're interested.
Sure. And if you put any of these links in the chat, I'll try and send them out to as many people as I can possibly can. And if anyone wants to put their email or send it to me privately, I can send you any of this information.
Yeah, I can follow up with you in an email, actually.
Perfect. And yeah, if you're on this chat right now and you want some more information, feel free to privately send me your email so that the whole world doesn't have to have it. And I'll put my email in here and you can feel free to email me and I can get more information out to you all. So a couple from Facebook. There's a question about if we should be worried about lead that's in paint or in our plates, our cups, pots and pans, like kitchenware.
So lead is in the USA. In our consumer goods, there isn't lead in paint anymore. So I wouldn't be worried about the kitchenware coming from the US, or like I said, certain other countries that do monitor, like to make that don't have lead in paint. There are other chemicals as well, which I'm not going to get into in this because this is about lead, but you have things like PFAS and PFOS that like in that non-stick, but that's a whole other conversation. When it comes to lead though, no, you really shouldn't have to worry about it. You shouldn't have to worry about it in cookware that you buy from the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But if you're buying cookware from like Amazon and it's coming from other places, is that something that we should be aware of?
Yeah, just yes, be aware that consumer products that come from other countries can contain lead because other countries might have different regulations when it comes to what, like, we have the FDA, for example, that's a regulatory entity for like food, and like we have these different, and that just looks differently in other countries. So yeah, just be aware. I don't want to scare anybody though. I won't be like, no, you can't, like, yeah, because it's not like that.
And then just another question that I see on Facebook. Well, first, a comment that I think everyone will agree with, and I definitely agree with, is the construction and those dust clouds. And if you live in this neighborhood, Port Richmond, Kensington, Fishtown, any of these, you know how much construction we're having. And we definitely have dust clouds of just construction dust, demolition dust, and the dust comes into people's homes. And it's just we 311 and 311 and 311, and these developers are quick and it's gone by the time anyone gets there. So that's not anyone's fault, but it's just a frustration that I'm sure everyone can agree with.
Yeah, and it's really hard to be like, if I could comment to your comment, it's really hard to be like, yeah, tell someone to just call 311 because sometimes it's not helpful, like, or like, just finding ways to strategize with other residents in the community about like, how do we hold developers accountable is an important conversation. I feel like, we community members should be having. I live in North Philly, so I'm in Kensington a lot of the time.
So you sympathize with us here.
I understand, like it's not happening right there on the side of me, but it's happening to people that I love and care about and am around all the time. So, yeah.
And just one last question. Could you talk a little bit more about how kids and adults can be tested for lead? It's blood testing and...
It's blood testing. So it's like a prick, and you can, both adults and children can just ask their primary care doctor to do that test. Sometimes primary care doctors might not initiate that conversation, but you totally have the right to ask for that, and to know you or your child's blood lead level. Automatically, when a child is tested for lead and their lead is considered elevated, it's reported to the health department, the Department of Health, and like there's something here in Philly called Lead in Healthy Homes program, and you might get called from them, and then like a schedule comes out, you get some education, they talk about remediation, but that's for everyone. Anyone can have their blood tested for lead.
And it's just a finger prick and not a full blood like full blood.
No, it's not yes, to answer your question.
And I think that those are all of our questions that we have right now. I'm not seeing any more on Facebook. I'm monitoring the chat as we speak, but I'll just give it a minute.
Yeah, all is well. But yeah, y'all, I'm going to say it one more time. We have a web series coming up. I would love for you all to attend. Truly, it's a great time. Seriously, these are local experts coming and talking about these things and answering questions and giving resources and stuff like that. And it's free. And it's an hour long. So I know we all have like Zoom fatigue and things like that, but it might be worth showing up. I encourage you to show up.
All right.
Okay.
So I'm going to send my email. I'm not seeing any more questions.
That's fine.
I just want to make sure everyone has a chance. I'm sending my email in both the chat here on Zoom, and I'll put it in the chat on Facebook as well. So if people would like to reach out and get connected with, do you want to also put your email in
Yeah,
there?
sure.
And I can send that on Facebook also. And if people would like to reach out with for more information or attend any of these additional online workshops or anything, that would be great. All right.
Yep.
All right. Thanks so much for coming and talking to us today.
Of course. I hope y'all have a nice day.
Yep. Thank you so much.
All right. Goodbye.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.